Okay, we're going to call to order the policy committee, AMATS policy committee meeting for Thursday, May 3rd. It's 9 a.m. All 5 members are present at the meeting today. We have an agenda before us. Mr. Lyon, can you give our public involvement announcement?
Yes, all of the AMATS meetings are public meetings. The public is invited to comment on any issues before us. If we have a business item on the agenda, we will have a presentation by staff and consultants first. The committee will then be given a chance to discuss it. At that point, the public will be given a chance to comment. After that, the matter will rest before the committee.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any additions or corrections proposed to the agenda as it's before us?
No.
Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make on the agenda? Okay, I'll assume that's approval for the agenda as proposed moving forward. We have minutes before us. Getting through my stack, I'm not sure I've got a copy of the minutes before me.
Should be up there at the top if you don't have it.
About to say I can't find it. Oh, yeah, right there. Okay, these are the December 15th minutes.
You need a sec?
I've got some, thank you. They miraculously appeared.
I would abstain from this. I was unable to attend that meeting, so.
Okay. I'll move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any corrections or amendments to the minutes as presented? Seeing none, any objection to their approval? Objection? These are accepted. Business items. Looks like we've got 2 or 3 things on our list today. We've got, first of all, the air quality conformity analysis approval. Mr. Lyons, who's going to be taking us through that?
I'll start, and hopefully Mr. Morris will answer questions or go through things if we need to. But basically, whenever we have a plan, in this case our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we need to first show that it is conforming, the air quality conformity. I mean, the analysis shows that it conforms. If we have a conforming plan, then we can adopt the plan. So the proper procedure is to adopt the conformity first and then the plan. And well, the folks met, the consultation team met and determined that it was. So we're good to go on that. But if Mr. Morris has any more detail he wants to share, I think that's the gist of it.
Yeah, I think we're asking the policy committee to adopt or approve the conformity with these 5 findings of fact. And we're being a little bit more rigorous than we have in the past, but basically, let me just kind of quickly go over the 5 findings of fact. Just make the first one just makes the point that because Anchorage is currently designated as a maintenance area for carbon monoxide and a non-attainment for PM10, we're required to go through this conformity process. And essentially, the conformity process is a way to ensure that, in our case, that we don't backslide and start violating air quality standards, that we have a state implementation plan that the state is required to adopt and get approved by EPA. There's certain requirements that are outlined in there and methods to stay in compliance with standards, and so we have to make sure that the MTP doesn't interfere with the continued attainment of the standards. We prepared the conformity. The second point of fact is that we prepared the conformity determination in conformance with federal regulations, which are outlined in 40 CFR 93. One of the tests to meet conformity for carbon monoxide is that the state implementation plan, or the SIP, establishes an emissions budget that Anchorage can't exceed, and it's basically a kind of a rough guideline of how much carbon monoxide could be emitted in the Anchorage Bowl and still attain the standard. And we've shown through modeling that we're underneath that ceiling or that budget. And the fourth thing is that Eagle River is considered actually technically still a non-attainment area, even though it hasn't violated air quality standards since the late 80s. We have a plan in to EPA through DEC that is called Limited Maintenance Plan. And basically, EPA set up a procedure for communities that have very low PM10 levels, well below the standard, to go through this limited maintenance plan procedure. They've had the plan now for about 2 years, but there is a method that they're allowed to do is they can find the plan, that limited maintenance plan, adequate for conformity purposes, and they've done that. Actually, they just published the Federal Register notice, and that becomes effective May 14th, so we're right on line. But essentially, all we have to do as a limited maintenance plan is show that our PM10 levels are still quite low, well below the standard. That's really the only test that's required for that, for conformity for PM10. That and making sure that the controls that are in place there are still there. Basically, it's that entails just paving and surfacing the roads in and around that urban part of Eagle River. And then finally, and I think Craig alluded to this, we've gone through an interagency consultation process. We've met with EPA, DOT, Federal Highways, DEC, and AMATS staff had a number of telephone consultations. The agencies have reviewed the report. They're comfortable with it. We've made a couple of minor changes in response to some of the comments that FHWA made. We went to the Air Quality Committee. They looked at this report in detail. They made some suggestions to the report, which staff agreed with, concurred with. We made some minor modifications to the public review draft. I think the most significant was to include transit projects in the list of projects that were considered as part of the conformity analysis. So we've done that. And they recommended the adoption of a plan as they suggested be amended. And then it went through the TAC, and they too have recommended that you adopt the conformity determination.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mr. Morris from the committee? I've got one question for you. It's not directly related to this. We've talked previously, Steve, about Anchorage being a maintenance area for carbon. What's the process for getting out of that label?
Well, it's a very long process. I think it's, is it 20 years, Alice? 20 years. We've gone about 10 now. I think we're at year 8, so we still have a long process. But what we'd like to do is pursue, they also have this avenue limited maintenance plan process for carbon monoxide as well. Mm-hmm. And we're beginning discussions about starting that process. And that would allow a much simpler conformity analysis process, and much like the PM10 process.
Do you need any help from this committee to initiate that process?
Kick in the pants. No, I don't at this point. But we may need some resources. We're not, to be honest, I don't know what's entailed completely in the development of limited maintenance plan. But if we need some, funding or something like that, we can certainly let the policy committee know.
I don't want to get too far into limb here, but I think that we'd all be interested in simplifying anything we can to do with this air quality conformity, and I think the committee would support that. If you can bring forward a plan, we'd be happy to help if we can. So that would be great. Okay, thank you then. Does anybody from the audience, the public sector, care to comment on our air quality conformity determination or any other related issue to this adoption? Silence, okay.
Move acceptance of the conformity determination.
Moved. Second. Seconded by Mr. Birch, I believe. That's it first. Okay, any further discussion from the committee? Any objection to adopting this as presented? No objections, it is adopted. Okay. Next on our business item is the 2035 MTP plan approval. I'm suspecting this might be our most interesting action item of the day. Got a couple things I'd like to kind of talk about first. First of all, how many people from the public are anticipating testifying on this? Anyone? 2? Great. We'll have plenty of time for that. Shouldn't be a problem. Secondly, does anybody from the committee have any substantive new issues besides what has been forwarded to us from the TAC that we need to consider? I'd like to have all of them on the table before we get started. Does anybody have any new or substantive other issues not covered in the memorandum from the TAC?
I think, Mr. Chairman, one of the people in the audience who will be speaking to us about Project 119 might require some consideration. That's the West Northern Lights improvements.
This would be Ms. Gleason's comments?
Correct. She was one of the people who raised her hands. And
So we've got, okay, I don't see that as a conflict in potential with what I see most of our work here today, but that's okay, so we've got one new issue there.
And other than that, I was just looking at a couple things. I've had some neighborhood concerns raised about Project 209, so I may want to speak about that.
Okay. I want to make sure that we're not doing something and then coming back later on to redo it with a different comment. So it doesn't sound like any of these things overlap is my main concern. They're all independent actions, okay? So having said all that, then I think we've got a good format to go forward. I guess what I'd like to do then is take forward the recommendations that have come through the municipality and TAC. And I think we'll get to those, Ms. Gleason and Mr. Flynn, your issues after we go through this, if that's okay. And I guess what I'd like to propose is that we work off of the TAC recommendation column here as our baseline for starting on these things. I think we've got about a dozen to go through. Does anybody have any objection with using that as our baseline committee? No? And then I guess I'll also propose that we just take them one at a time and go down the list. And we'll, I guess what I'd like to do is, well, let's take the first one on and see what happens. And then if individuals from the crowd, would you like to speak once at the beginning, once at the end, or would you like to reserve the right to speak multiple times on each one of these issues? And your answer may or may not be accepted.
Mr. Chairman, is this table available for, does everyone know what we're talking about here?
Over there.
This is a handout called the Public Hearing Draft 2035 MTP. It's about 4 sheets stapled together. It's got about 5 columns on it, page number, assembly amendment, TAC recommendation, comment. This is the document that we'll be working off of for the first 15 or 20 minutes here.
I think just for process, we probably ought to offer folks the opportunity to speak on each amendment.
Okay.
If they have any concerns.
Sure, we'll do that.
I doubt we'll hear much, but.
And if I might, as a clarification for process, you're going to discuss each of the changes, and then at the end, you're going to move to the document and the changes together? Or are you going to put the document on the table as a motion and then work on each amendment?
I guess I'd prefer to put the document on, work on each amendment and get it crossed off. But again, I will entertain ideas if somebody has a different one.
I think that's the right choice, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I would like to do that as we
Just
can.
act on each amendment individually.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Probably simpler for you too.
Okay, so having said that, I guess what we've got then before us is an proposed action to adopt this plan. And can we have a motion to that effect, just to get on the
Move approval of the 2035 MTP.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, and now to that action, we will go through the written comments as forwarded by the TAC, and we will then take public comments or intersperse with public comments as we move forward these amendments to start with. So table 4.2 and 4.5, we've got the recommendation to add in parents, rural and urban under collector. I'll just ask, does anybody have any issues with that?
Move the amendment.
Second.
Any objections? Okay, that's moved to adopted then.
Do we quickly make sure?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Okay. I'm getting ahead of
I
myself.
don't think there'll be any comments then.
Does anybody from the public have any comments on that first issue? No? Thank you. Okay. All right, the second one I think is probably going to be a little more meaty. And what we've got before us is a assembly ordinance and summary on page 632, which is the closing section, I believe, of the so-called Kabata chapter. And we've got here a fairly long statement. The TAC has recommended approval of those statements with a couple of changes. The changes are underlined in the TAC recommendation column. They consist of for AMATS project in the funding sentence and referencing a couple tables later on. So I guess I would like to have discussion about the TAC recommendation. Does anybody have any comments on, number one, the overall assembly recommendation. Anybody resisting that?
But the only comment I would have, Mr. Chairman, is that, on the surface, it seems fairly innocuous. There's no funding currently in the plan. It has its own separate funding, but I'm not sure that as a body, we would want to say never to any possible funding allocation. We don't want to tie the hands of future committees. When we use absolutes in language, you'll never do something. At some point, people never thought the municipality would own a gas field. Well, purchase of that gas field's been a huge boon to our municipal light and power. We might want to buy this bridge someday as a revenue source, and so I don't know. Just in general concept, I just feel a little, I guess, constrained by saying we should never designate any other funds for this project. Things change.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Birch?
I just note that I was a no vote on this ordinance coming out of the assembly, and for a number of the concerns that the mayor voiced, I just was concerned about the level of constraint that it did offer, down the road. And I think that, the projects still have to come back through this body, this process. And I think some of those concerns have been mitigated somewhat, in reviewing the TAC recommendations and subsequent discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, of course, what the Assembly approved, with 9 votes, by the way, was consistent with the standard set by the Assembly 5 years ago. I believe my colleagues to my left and right were on the Assembly at the time. And really, of course, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan will be updated in about 4 or 5 years here, depending on how quickly we get around to it. So I don't think it causes any harm to say that the funds we have designated for AMATS projects, those in the tip, it is problematic. Certainly, we as the AMATS Policy Committee lack the power to prevent the federal government or the state government putting dollars toward the bridge. And no matter what we do in this document. So I think it's an appropriate addition. And I actually did some research and can happily provide the definition. There's a comment from the TAC about clarifying what local funds are. I can enumerate them for the benefit of the body. We've got AMATS tip money. That's the money that we receive through our transportation improvement project list, which subsequently becomes part of the STIP. We have arts and bond monies. We have operating and maintenance funds that we fund through our street maintenance department. And if we need to enumerate those, that would make folks more comfortable and give some clarity to the TAC. I think it's absolutely appropriate to add that.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. No, just in process, I guess this amendment hasn't been moved and we're discussing it. Do you need a motion before we actually discuss a motion?
I think you wanted philosophy first.
I guess we probably should have a motion in front of us to adopt this amendment, so
Or to even discuss it?
to discuss it, yeah.
I'll move amendment number 2.
Anybody would care to second that? Thanks, Josh. Okay. So, Mr. Flynn, did you complete your comments on this?
The only other point I'll make, Mr. Chairman, is the Assembly's approval of the MTP and incorporating it into the comprehensive plan is predicated on some sort of adoption of this language into the MTP.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any further comments on this, sir?
No.
Okay. Ms. Edwards, do you have any further comments on this?
Conceptually, no. Do you want to talk about the table references in there?
I do.
I was thinking
certainly-
that might be an issue that maybe if we did move forward with the language, we might want to consider whether we want to include those tables or not. I'm not sure it's critical to the language.
Yeah, I think that's the place that I want to go, and thank you for bringing it up, is I think I would like to strike the reference from tables as recommended by the TAC. I think the tables referenced there include a lot of funding sources that are not germane to this body. And I think it would further confuse some of your concerns, Mr. Mayor, about trying to dictate policy to bodies and people in times that aren't really germane to this committee.
Second.
So, I guess, thank you.
The chair can't.
Yeah, so moved.
Thank you.
Second by Mr. Birch. To delete tables 6-5 and 6-6.
So I guess what we've got before us now is the TAC recommendation striking the reference to the table 6.5 and 6.6 up for discussion. Does anybody have any other changes they'd like to propose or further amendments to this recommendation? Okay, I guess I'd like to see, does the public have any comments they'd like to make about where we're at right now in this recommendation? We've got two motions in front of us to adopt it and to strike 6.5 and 6.6. Mr. Spring?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. In writing the TAC recommendation, I neglected to add a change that they made regarding the last sentence in the first paragraph. Towards that end, the Anchorage Assembly required that the plan include the following longstanding policy. TAC actually recommended deleting that sentence in their deliberations.
Yeah, well, it's not in the TAC recommendation,
It was not, I did not include that in the TAC recommendations, and it should have been.
but it should have been included.
It should have been included in
So
there.
you're saying we've got a clerical error of some sort here, that we
Yes.
have not correctly transposed the TAC recommendations into this sheet? Is that what you're telling me?
That should have been included in the recommendation as a deletion.
Question, is a deletion denoted by the little brackets? Because you've
Correct.
got brackets behind, around beyond that, which is currently authorized under the TAC recommendation. It's a little- Is that?
I believe that is the symbol for deletion, yes. I believe those are the recommendations from the TAC, to add those two phrases and to delete that one phrase. And now Mr. Spring has told us we've got a fourth recommendation, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this in a minute, but his statement is that the sentence beginning with "towards that end" should be also bracketed and in the TAC column over here as a change. That, I believe, is what he's saying.
Yeah, well, the fact that it doesn't exist in the TAC column kind of shows us that it was, but technically, yes, I suppose we should have it.
It should be in there and it should be in brackets. And I guess I'm kind of wondering now, Mr. Lyon, do you have any light to shed on the veracity? Not that I'm questioning Mr. Spring, but I kind of hate to go on his personal recollection or interpretation of that. Do we have any formal record of that meeting, and do we have any way to verify that?
I believe that's what my notes showed as well.
That the intent of the TAC was to delete the sentence beginning with "towards"? Does the committee have any objection to accepting that, at least for discussion, as a TAC recommendation?
No
Okay,
objection.
all right. So I guess we'll move forward with that. Thank you, Mr. Spring. Let me go back again and say then, let me do two more things here before we get to the public comment on this then. Let's work down through this TAC recommendation beyond that which is currently authorized. Does anybody have any comments or concerns about deleting that phrase as the TAC has recommended?
Just as a clarification, it says TAC recommended approval with the following revisions. So does that mean it incorporates the?
All the rest of the text is the assembly text, which is on the left-hand column is the baseline for that text with the modifications as proposed by the TAC.
Thank you.
So, are we still just discussing the deletion of the tables?
I think my sense is we have moved beyond deletion of the tables, and we are now at beyond that which is currently authorized is the thing that we're addressing, but I could be mistaken. Are you still on tables?
I'm still on tables.
Okay, we're still on tables.
Well, I think there's 3 deletion items. I think you've got the question about deleting in the assembly amendment, the towards that end, the last sentence that Mr.
Yep, we do.
referenced. Okay, that's an item. We have the tables item, and then we have the bracketed item in the second column beyond
Okay.
that, which is, so we have basically
Let
3
me,
items.
let me back up here for a minute then. Let's take this slow and methodically. We've got the assembly amendment before us that is moved and seconded for consideration. We have got a secondary motion in front of us, I believe, to delete the tables from that. Let's continue the discussion on the tables and vote and get that settled one way or another. So does anybody have any further discussion on the tables?
Objection.
Mr. Flynn?
I just shouldn't keep them in, but get to that when we vote and invite public comment.
Okay. Public comment on striking the tables from the TAC recommendation. No comment. Okay, I guess I sense that there might be a division here, so let's just say all those in favor of striking tables, let's raise our hands. Opposed to striking tables? Okay, that passes 4-1. Let's now discuss the AMATS project, which was proposed to be inserted in this. Can I have a motion to discuss that, please?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and approved. Discussion from the committee on whether or not that phrase, as recommended by the TAC, should be inserted into this sentence.
I think that's an appropriate, I guess, interpretation of what used to be the reference to the LRTP in the previous, well, in the old LRTP. So I think it's a good interpretation. I appreciate the TAC's work on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee comments on that? Public comments on adding the phrase AMATS project as noted in the TAC recommendations. No public comments. Let's raise hands again. All those in favor of adopting this recommendation? Hands? Okay, 5-0. That passes. Let's move down now to the third modification on this, which is the deletion proposed, starting with beyond that which is currently and ending with authorized. It's in brackets. Can I have a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and second. Thank you. Discussion.
I'll probably vote no on this one, Mr. Chairman. I think I was doing a good enough job wasting our money.
Okay. Further discussion. Mr. Birch, Mr. Mayor.
No, I think the TAC got it right on
Okay, Ms. Edwards, any comments? Public, any comments on the motion before us, which is to adopt the TAC recommendation to strike the phrase beyond which is currently authorized? No comments? Okay, let's have a show of hands. Those in favor? 4, opposed? 1. Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
It's my nature. What Mr. Campbell loves about it.
You've got a place here. Now we are going to move to the fourth thing, which is the Mr. Springs recommendation confirmed by Mr. Lyon that we had a clerical mishap and the phrase or sentence towards that end, the Anchorage Assembly required the plan include the following, that sentence be struck from the TAC recommendation. Can I have a motion on that, please?
it. Move to approve.
Moved and approved. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Discussion. Mr. Burke.
May I make an inquiry on? Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, just, in my understanding is that bracketed phrase would then go into the second column right before the no funding that's in quotes.
Correct. Well, it would actually not, if
Either
it
in
would clerically
brackets.
be,
Yeah.
yes, if clerically it had been correct, it would have been in the secondary column, absolutely in brackets. That's, I think that's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Flynn, did you have comments?
I'd like to make an inquiry. Bart, could you help me, could you walk us through sort of how the TAC arrived at this recommendation?
From my understanding, it was because they were slightly changing the wording of the exact ordinance that you wrote. But they didn't want it to say that that was exactly what the assembly had adopted, just because they changed it slightly.
I see. Okay.
And anyone can correct me if I'm wrong on the
That
tap.
makes sense. And they'd be speaking for the assembly with a revision.
Right. Well, I guess, Mr. Chairman, I think this would be clearer if we only deleted long-standing because we are changing the policy somewhat in that the previous policy referenced the LRTP and the existing LRTP. Now we're looking forward at the new MTP. But it is certainly a policy call, so I think, I mean, it doesn't have,
Okay, I hear your comment. I guess I would say that if we want to get into wordsmithing this thing.
it's dangerous, I know.
We can all get out our pencils and erasers and start saying, I mean, I take exception to the word required, because I don't think the assembly can technically require this body to do anything. So if we want to start parsing this, we can.
Advised, but not required. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's plenty of stuff here, and I'd be more than willing. I've got quite a few hours.
Mary has lunch at 11:30.
So we've got a motion in front of us. If you'd like to amend that motion, if you'd like to suggest a different motion, you could certainly begin that conversation, and we'll take it on as you see fit.
We're getting into a long trail of amend.
Yeah. Well, we're still amending the same basic thing. You're doing great. I'm sure it's going to be great.
You might actually read these minutes really close.
I think we all will.
Me too.
Okay, so is there any, I guess I'm not sure if Mr. Flynn is writing his corrections or what, but let me go to the public. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment on the proposal before us now, which is to strike that sentence that begins with the word towards and ends with policy? Yes, sir, if you'd stand up and state your name and then.
Yeah, Todd Logan, and I did attend most of this TAC meeting where this wording is worked on. My only question is, if you're going to strike that complete sentence, well, it cues up the subsequent paragraph. If that sentence totally vanishes, you now have a paragraph just standing there with no explanation. So I'm just confused about at least fully striking it.
I think I may have a solution, Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Logan, for your comment. Okay, Mr. Flynn, you've got for discussion right now.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest perhaps rather than striking the sentence in its entirety, we replace it with the following sentence, which would be, towards that end, the Assembly predicated incorporation of the MTP into the comprehensive plan. On inclusion of the following policy. And I'll say that one more time because I got stuck in the middle and may have confused people. Finish writing it out so I can share it with our minutes. Because she's going to be very upset with me, I can tell. So one more time. Towards that end, the Assembly predicated incorporation of the MTP into the comprehensive plan on inclusion of the following policy. If you want to try and read my chicken scratch, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happily sure.
I'm writing my own chicken scratches, thank you.
Okay.
So can you read that again, please, Mr.
Of course.
Predicated incorporation of
Towards that end, the Assembly predicated incorporation of the MTP into the comprehensive plan on inclusion of the following policy.
Okay. So,
And if, in order to discuss, Mr. Chairman, I'll move that as, I guess, an amendment to the amendment.
A substitute amendment.
A substitute amendment.
well, let's see if anybody cares to second that. Does anybody care to second that for discussion?
I can second it for discussion.
Okay. So now we've got a proposed modification to the striking of that, and I guess, Mr. Birch, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just went back, look at the resolution. I should say the ordinance, yeah, so the ordinance. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the comprehensive plan.
Well, I'd be happy to explain it, Mr. Chairman, if that helps. If you read section 4 of the ordinance, it gets to the heart of what I'm trying to explain, which is the effective date, the effective action of the incorporation into the comprehensive plan is, in fact, only on us doing something like that, what we're doing here, to, I guess, protect the integrity of local funds or local projects and local project funding. And that is what we did.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. I guess,
Can we read his proposed language one more time?
please
Be
do.
happy to. Towards that end, the Assembly predicated incorporation of the MTP into the comprehensive plan on inclusion of the following policy.
I guess I've got a few thoughts on this, and now it's starting to read like kind of a news report in a way, in that it's really just documenting what somebody else did, and, that's fine, I guess, but I'm not really sure, again, it's relevant to this document per se, and I think it might add, and it already has added, I think, a level of confusion that I'm not sure that it's going to be helpful. But having said that, I will certainly entertain other thoughts from the committee and from the public eventually. Mr. Birch, do you have any further thoughts you'd like to bring forward on this?
And just the circular nature of the, if you don't do this, then we don't do that. I guess it's kind of a tangle, if you will.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, again, people can do what they want to do, their own language is their own language, this is our language, and I want to make sure we get this right. And I'll let other people worry about what they've done to themselves with their own circular language. That's their problem.
Yeah, I think the TAC actually simplified it, which in a document like this is exactly what you want. You want clarity. And to the gentleman's comment, I think it does not need a preface, if you will. It stands alone if the recommendation in the conclusion section is simply as it reads, no funding currently planned shall be used to support, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's unclear, certainly.
Okay. Ms. Edwards, do you have any further thoughts on this issue?
No, I think the colleagues here have stated most of what I was thinking, so.
Okay. Would anybody from the public like to illuminate us on their thoughts on this issue? Please. For their illumination. Okay, so I guess what we've got before us is Mr. Flynn's secondary motion to adopt his language. And then on top of that, we've got the motion to strike the entire thing. So let's take those in reverse order and say, does anybody, Mr. Flynn, do you still want to have a vote on your language? I guess that would be the correct thing to do at this point. Okay, so let me just put it this way. Anybody that has any further comments on this language before we take a vote on it? Okay. So I would like to bring Mr. Flynn's language up for a vote, and everyone that thinks that language be substituted for the previous language, let's raise hands again. In favor? One in favor. Those opposed? Four opposed. Okay? So now I think that brings us to the secondary or the primary motion. I guess the first motion was to strike this sentence from the document as recommended by the TAC. Does anybody have any further discussion on that now that we've clarified the language in it? No?
Urge approval.
All in favor of that, striking that? Four in favor, Mr. Flynn, opposed, thank you. 4-1, okay, so that is struck. So I believe then this, unless this is continued, this is the end of this particular section. And so we now have modified this section, and I believe we now have to adopt it
Right,
in its
but
entirety.
I think I will be proposing one more amendment. sir.
One more amendment,
Yes.
of course.
The the last sentence where it says, in addition, no local funds will be used for construction or maintenance of this project, I move to delete that section.
In its entirety.
Yes, and I'll explain why if I get a second.
Second.
I don't think it's the AMATS Policy Committee's job to tell us how to spend other local funds. We have any number of sources of funds, as you mentioned when you discussed the tables, that really aren't under the purview of AMATS. And I'd hate to see AMATS make a recommendation beyond the scope of what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Mr. Burge, any further comments on that? Mr. Flynn? Reasonable.
Mr. Chairman, that would be contrary to the Assembly's conditions for incorporation into the long-term, or into the comprehensive plan.
And my only response to that, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Went out of
Mr.
order.
Flynn?
I'm sorry.
Complete your thoughts.
Were someone inclined to challenge approval of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and its incorporation into the comprehensive plan, removing that sentence, I think, would give them cause. And I'll leave that at that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Edwards, do you have any further comments on this motion for us to strike that sentence as identified by the mayor?
No, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, any
Yeah.
further comments?
Yeah, just, I understand the Assembly passed the ordinance indicating this language, but once it comes to us, we have to look at what our scope of responsibility is, and I don't think it includes telling the local government body how to spend any and all dollars they might receive. We could get a private grant from an individual that says, I want this to be used for this project, and I don't think it's then within our purview to say that you cannot spend it on any particular project if it was so designated.
Thank you. I'd like to add my 2 cents also and say that I agree conceptually that this type of language, I think, is not really constructive in what we're trying to accomplish here. And I believe that really what we're trying to accomplish is to identify stuff within our jurisdiction. And that is primarily the AMATS funds, which we've identified earlier on in this motion as being the primary target for this language. And I would concur with your assessment. Does anybody from the public wish to comment on Mr. Sullivan's request or motion to delete that sentence from the? Yes, sir, please.
Mr. Chairman, Kennedy,
Thank you.
the mayor's free to veto what the assembly did, but since the MTP is fiscally constrained, and you've done a thorough job documenting what revenues are necessary to do what construction projects, I think it is your responsibility to look at all the projects you want to do and what revenue you have. And if the assembly looked at that plan and was concerned about the toll shortfall on the bridge and decided that we didn't have enough revenue to do all the other projects, if the plan was going to be responsible for any toll shortfalls, then I think you're basically bringing up the issue of fiscal constraint. And I think the plan to date has done a good job balancing those issues. And taking out no local funds is just inviting FHWA back into our business.
Thank you. Any further comments? I guess we'll move forward then, and unless there's an objection, we'll take a vote on this thing. All those in favor of striking the language, which I believe was the mayor's recommendation, please raise your hand. All in favor, Mr. Flynn, I assume you're voting opposed?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I can raise his hand.
I'm tired.
Okay. All right, so I think we've now waded through the modifications to this, and we now have before us the motion to adopt this now modified TAC recommendation. Do I have any further discussion on that in light of all the modifications and work we've just done on it? Does the public now have any comments on adopting this thing as we've done? Excuse me?
There's particularly regarding meaning of local funds, is that?
We just struck that.
Well, since local funds are no longer in it, it's probably not an
We
issue.
just struck that from
It's not, it was not referenced.
It's not relevant now to this
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
It's all good. Okay, I'm sorry, did the public have any further comments they care to make on this section in its entirety now? We've gone through the edits on it, we've got the entire motion in front of us. No comments, okay, all those in favor then of adopting this modified section as part of the MTP for this year, please raise your hand. Favor? 3, opposed? 2, okay. Moving on to, yes.
Oh, I voted for your amendment there, Nick.
We're now on number 3, which is on table 7.1 on page 7.5, which the TAC recommendation is to clarify the definition of cost benefit. And I believe that when you read through this, what we're proposing to do is to change the formula to what is written under, when it says recommend changing the criteria to cost divided by length in paren times AADT, closed paren. I believe that is the change that we're talking about here, and it's a substitution of a formula that was a little bit less clear. Is that the correct assessment, Mr. Spring?
Yes, Mr. Chair. That's exactly it. The formula,
Thank you.
if you calculate the formula the old way versus the new way, it comes out exactly the same. But it was unclear exactly at least to the assembly, that what it was trying to do. And it's trying to estimate what the cost benefit is.
Sure.
This, I think, makes it a little bit clearer.
Okay, so does anybody have a motion to make on this, please?
Move to approve.
And a second. Moved and second. Any discussion from the committee on this? Comments? Any discussion from the public on this? Okay, all those in favor of adoption, hands? Thank you, passes unanimously. Moving on to number 4. Revise the description of project 112, and it's deleting the reference to rehabilitate from 4 to 2 lanes with center lane and inserting rehabilitate to improve traffic flow.
Move approval.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion from the committee on this?
Yes, that's my old assembly district, so I'm very familiar with this project, and there's not consensus between the stakeholders in this particular area about just what the road design should be, but everybody does agree, and there is consensus that the road does need to be rehabilitated and traffic flow improved. And because in that whole section from Hillcrest to Benson, there's concepts now that include both 4-lane and 3-lane being prescriptive and saying rehabilitate from 4 to 2 would be, I guess, stating what might end up happening at this stage. So I think the TAC recommendation is good.
Thank you. Any further comments from the committee? Anybody from the public have any comments on this language and its proposed change to the MTP? No comments? All those in favor of the recommendation? Hands? Aye. No one opposed? Okay, that passes. We're on to number 5, which is, I believe, essentially, that's not the same thing. Okay, so in this one, it would be.
It is the same thing, it's a different section of road.
Okay, and then I think it also adds a secondary comment, which is including the feasibility and impact analysis on local properties. Motion, please.
Move to approve.
Second. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Discussion?
Again, I think the amendment makes sense. There's a proposal now at 36 in Spenard for a couplet, and it would be quite a change in that area, including taking quite a bit of property, I think, in order to construct it, and we wanted to make sure that we knew just what that impact would be.
I guess I'll comment briefly that I think this is an inherent step in any project, and I hate to, once again, identify a specific project for a singular action that should be undertaken on every project. It's kind of the old special example thing again, where almost all project development that involves significance would have an impact on the properties analysis done as part of it. So I think I would probably, well, I guess I'm not sure what I'll do. Maybe I'll just pull up Mr. Flynn and. Wow. This is fun. Before I get too far off base here, anybody from the public care to comment on, basically what we've got is 3 things here. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
There was a gentleman in the back.
Yes, sir, please state your name and.
Yeah, sorry, Jed Smith. And maybe I should have spoken up on the last one. I can certainly understand the reason for not constraining it from the 4-lane to the 2-lane project, but as a resident of the area and as a pedestrian, a bicyclist, and a motorist, just the impression that improving traffic flow gives me a little bit of angst for some of the bicyclists and pedestrians that I do see. So just want to let you know as a member of the public what that impression that improved traffic flow leaves, if you can just include your thoughts of pedestrians and bicyclists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, that's a good point.
Mr. Chairman, if I can perhaps speak to more generally to this amendment, as the unfortunately Mr. Birch wasn't able to be physically present at the assembly meeting where we considered this, and so I took it upon myself to try and shepherd this document through the assembly process. So we only had 4 pages of amendments, pretty good.
Most of them generated by, oh, no.
None by me. In many cases, and in fact, in this case specifically, I spoke against getting too specific about a project and the process that would go forth. And that's why most of these amendments are relatively general. On this one, the reason that this latter addition, the part that reads the feasibility and impact analysis on local properties was included, was because I believe it's Cook Inlet Housing owns a property on the northwest corner of the intersection and has recently apparently purchased the old PJ's facility across the street on the southwest corner, and has, they're investing substantial funds in basically building a campus. And the couplet concept challenged them and their ability to move forward. And so the amendment was actually brought forth by Mr. Hall and Ms. Drummond, who represent the area now. And because of the couplet concept is, I'm not gonna say radical, but would substantially change the character of the area, I was comfortable letting this one come forward to the policy committee, or actually to the TAC and then to the policy committee. But in general, I tried to keep the higher level of specificity out of these amendments, and generally the assembly went along with that.
Well, I certainly appreciate that action. Yeah, that's the right thing to do.
So,
But I still,
I understand your concern.
This one has come forward, and I do have a concern, as
Sure.
you correctly predicted.
every once in a while I figure things out.
Well, right on this one. So I don't believe we had any other public comment on this. I guess we've got a motion in front of us to adopt this as written, and I guess I'll just close and say that I'm probably going to vote against it just as a act of defiance, but I don't have any problem with most of it in general. I just think this, again, as you very well illuminated, this gets into a very specific individual process step that I don't think is appropriate for planning the document. But having said that, I'm not going to throw myself on the sword too much. So we've got a motion in front of us. All those in favor of adopting it, please raise your hand. Opposed? 4-1, it passes.
Welcome to the club, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So now we're on to number 6. Moved and seconded. And let me see if I can cut to the chase on this thing. And I think what it is, let me get a little help on this. Mr. Spring, is this just moving a project from a long-term list to a short-term list? Is that essentially what we're doing here?
It's Mr. Chair, it's a multi-part issue. There's a movement by the Assembly to move Highland Road project, which was formerly in the illustrative list, which means it wouldn't have been funded, into 2 parts. One part is a short-term project, and the other is a long-term project. The short-term project is number 6, which is
long-term is number 7.
3.4, and there's another number 7 item there right below it is the second part, which takes the rest of the project and puts it in the long term. And further down, you'll see item 8 takes another project which was previously in the long term, which is project 308, 308, which is the South Bridgewood Loop project, and moves that from the long term to illustrative, thereby balancing the financial constraint of the plan.
Okay, so let me see if I can paraphrase what you just said, not having a scorecard here. We had one project, we're now dividing into two. And was that original project in the short term or the long term?
Original project was in the illustrative.
Illustrative. Okay, and so now part of it's going to short and part of it is going into long term? Okay. And then as a continuation of that, we're switching out number 8 to keep our financial constraints intact. Is that where?
Moving the South Bridge
Okay.
Loop Road from long to illustrative.
Thank you for explaining that in language that I can understand. Well done. Okay, so I guess we've got kind of a three-part thing here, but let's take them one at a time so that we don't get the chairman confused. We have number 6, moved and seconded. Do we have any discussion amongst the committee on this?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I know this is a little bit strange, but because of the fiscal constraint issue, I would be more comfortable voting on amendments 6 through 8 as a block. Because what they do as a group is basically take a long-term project, put it in the illustrative, take an illustrative and split it into the short and long. And if we did one, did do the other.
We're going to go to the same place here pretty quickly.
Yeah, but
Do you have any objection to this
I certainly don't
motion that's before us? No? Okay. Anybody in the public have any comments on this proposal? All in favor? Hands up. 5, opposed, none. Number 7, same basic, moved,
Second.
seconded. Discussion amongst the committee? Public, any comments from the public on this? No? In favor? Mr. Birch?
No, it's fine. No comments.
No comments.
We're voting.
We're voting.
Yes, no, I-
Okay, thank you.
I like the block idea.
I wasn't sure if you were joining the 4-1 club or.
Oh, no.
Coffee after this is over.
Okay. Thank you. And then number 8 is the continuation of this block.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Comments from the committee? Comments from the public? In favor? Thank you. Passes. Okay, we're on to number 9. And sentence under the cost estimate that the Kinnick Ferry will be assumed Matsu Borough funding. A motion, please?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I think appreciate the TAC's, we didn't actually pass an amendment about this, but at least a couple of our colleagues in the Assembly didn't seem to understand this piece of it, and were concerned that there wasn't any funding proposed in the MTP, and so I think this clarifies and
Funding stream for us.
if folks understand where we're going. So.
Thank you. Any other comments?
So just, we've obviously been working with the Matsu Borough for a number of years on this, and it is, I think, a little bit misunderstood that it is their obligation to build the ferry landing on our side. It would have to come from their funds, and a lot of folks think that somehow, how come Anchorage hasn't built the ferry landing yet? Well, we don't plan to build the ferry landing, and we have been working cooperatively to find a spot for it.
Thank you. Any further comments, Ms. Edwards? Any thoughts on this? No? Any public comments on this number 9, proposed for adoption? Okay, no further comments. All those in favor of adopting the language as recommended? 5, opposed, none. Okay, number 10.
Move to approve.
Moved.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Birch, thank you. Adds a new transit project. Project cost estimate is 0.
To explain, Mr. Chairman, several years ago, in an austerity measure, we eliminated local service within the Chicago River area, for local people mover service within the Chicago River area. The long-term plan for people mover has been being reinstated, but that would be funded by Anchorage operating fund dollars, general fund dollars, as opposed to MTP dollars. But they wanted the project in there so that it was part of the long-range transit plan.
Thank you. Any further discussion from the committee here? Discussion, anybody from the public care to comment? No, no comments. All those in favor? 5, opposed, none. Okay, number 11. We've got a new action item under the, I think it's under the policy part of this table, to discuss updating and refining screening criteria used to rank short-term and long-term projects in NTP to take into consider differences in the sub-area needs and priorities. And I don't know who this is referring to. So, can I have a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Move, thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Mr. Flynn, do you have a?
I'll just say that this one and the next 1, 2, 3, I guess 3 amendments were brought forward by my colleagues who represent the geographic river areas, and they noted that those areas tend to be, some parts of those areas tend to be more rural, and therefore the scoring criteria may not take into account for example, the lack of, or the less necessary pedestrian amenities, lighting, and so on and so forth, and they were concerned that the criteria as presented in the MTP might unfairly bias against us moving those projects forward, and therefore they asked.
Thank you. Good explanation. Mr. Birch, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, we have similar issues in South Anchorage, in the more rural areas. I think I think anytime you reshuffle, I mean, we tend to push everything towards the traffic demand, and this recognizes there's some other issues and considerations to be taken into account.
Okay. So I take that as you're saying you agree with that concept? Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, any comments? Any comments? Anybody from the public have any comments on this? Okay, all those in favor? Hands up. Thank you. No one opposed. Number 12.
I'll move.
Well, we've got a modification here. We've got the assembly action, and then we've got the TAC, which is recommended striking the word implementation and project initiation. Mr. Flynn, I hear you moved the two.
I did move to approve that.
Okay, and can we get a second, Mr. Birch? Thank you. Okay, so we've got now a TAC recommendation before us, which has the phrase project initiation in it instead of implementation. Any comments from the body?
If the TAC clarification is good, Mr. Chairman.
I would agree. Anybody else care to comment on that? Anybody from the public care to comment on that? No comments, so we've got as the TAC recommendation going forward now for vote. All those in favor? 5, thank you. Any opposed? We're on to number 13.
I'll move the TAC recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Mr. Sprague, do you have any knowledge about this TAC recommendation that you can illuminate us with?
Yes, Mr. Chair. It's the TAC recommendation recommends approval of the assembly language, but rather than put it in page 3 or 83, move it to A6. The original language under A3 explains about the priorities within the Geoghegan River area, and this particular bullet doesn't refer to priorities. The TAC felt that it was better to put it into the transportation system policy recommendations on page 86.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion from the committee on this? Thoughts? No? Any comments from the public on this? None? All those in favor? 5. Okay, thank you. I believe we're on to number 14.
I'll move the TAC recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Okay, I think we kind of talked about this before, previous things, but I will open it for discussion. Does anybody on the committee have any discussion they'd care to have on this? Not hearing any comments from the public on this recommendation? No comments, those in favor of the recommendation? 5, that's 4.5. Number 15.
I'll move amendment number 15, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. This is on the table. We'll keep it up. And this is to different LOS standards may be adopted for different areas of the municipality of Anchorage. And I assume this is a continuation of the previous discussion about sub-areas and different rural, urban characteristics.
Your assumption is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further discussion from the committee on this comment, on this recommendation, excuse me? Anybody from the public care to have a go at this one? No? Those in favor of adoption? Thank you, 5-0. Our last one on this sheet, number 16.
I'll move under number 16, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Promote the integration of appropriate non-motorized public transportation facilities. Okay, coordination of public input during the project scoping phase, page 7.
Essentially a continuation of the previous conversation.
Thank you. All right, any further?
Well, except that this does not speak, or I think infer that it's particularly to rural areas of the city. There's also even areas within the bowl that is having appropriate non-motorized public transportation, et cetera, et cetera. We tend to have a one-size-fits-all when we have our collector and arterial standards, and there are some areas that, just quite frankly, don't meet that need. So the word appropriate, I think, was very well used, as well as getting rid of the word all, which you see in brackets there, which would imply that certain things have to happen on every single road construction project. So
Okay.
I think it gives a little leeway.
Gives a little more flexibility depending on the setting for the project.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further comments from the committee on this? Okay, any comments from the public? Once again, hands for those in favor of the adoption. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, so we've worked our way through this, which was the formal stuff. I believe, Ms. Gleason, why don't we take, I believe you had an issue that you care to bring before us for recommendation of a change to the MTP. Could you stand and deliver?
Yes, actually, I have more than one, but we'll take one at a time.
That's the way we do it.
Yes, I sent you our comment letter to the Assembly yesterday, and I appreciate you drawing your attention to it. Trinity Community Council's request, and I'm Kathy Gleason, I'm president of Trinity Community Council. We have requested this for many years, that any major upgrades to West Northern Lights between Postmark Drive and Nathaniel Court be deleted from the transportation plans of Anchorage. That stretch of road is what you might call rural, in that the residential ends and it just is a secondary route to the airport. There's parkland, there's coastal trail, there's airport land, and so and the sewage treatment plant, Woodrow Center, it's rural for all practical purposes. I think the mayor just put it perfectly in the last amendment that you approved, is that one size doesn't fit all in terms of the roads in this area. And ideally, the council would like to see that project completely deleted from the plan. It's project number 119. But if you choose to keep any kind of road upgrade in the plan, we specifically request that you delete any kind of turn pockets, new sidewalk, or new bike path as part of the project. This was discussed when the long-range transportation was being updated in the mid-2000s, and appropriately, the AMATS Policy Committee deleted a sidewalk and bike path from that plan. So if you refer to that plan now, it says under new trail, non-applicable, sidewalk, non-applicable. And I think that's the most appropriate decision for this body to make as well. There is an existing bike trail. It serves the public well. It serves our neighborhood well. It's a really good access point from our residential area through Earthquake Park and to Postmark. It's, in most cases, much farther separated from the road than any new bike path conforming to arterial standards would have to conform to. The public is much safer, and it's a much more scenic, rural kind of route to take in terms of a bike path. And there's absolutely no need for a sidewalk on the south side where the public would walk along airport property, fenced in, and a little bit of earthquake park. So I ask that you delete those amenities that are part of this plan at a cost of $14.9 million. I think that kind of money could be much better spent on other transportation needs and non-motorized transportation facilities in the city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I don't support the deletion, but I do support the second portion of Ms. Gleason's comments, and I would move to, on project 119, that the proposed construction of turning pockets, a new sidewalk, and a new pathway as part of the project be deleted from the project description.
Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you.
And just a further comment, I live in that area as well, and Ms. Gleason's correct, there's absolutely no need for a sidewalk on the south side of that stretch of road from Nathaniel to Postmark. The existing coastal trail gives tremendous access for bike riders, and I do think the road needs upgrading. And it's getting to a point where, like with any surface, after a while, the wear and tear gets to be a bit dangerous for motor traffic, but the rest of the amenities, I think, is overkill on this section.
Sorry, could you clarify what your amendment was, Mr. Mayor?
If you look right here on Ms. Gleason's.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the actual project. Are you?
In the description, where turning box, new sidewalk, and a new pathway be deleted from the project description.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
got it. May I ask a clarifying question, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. What you got?
For Ms. Gleason. Ms. Gleason, the project as it's written in the plan includes rehabilitation of pavement, adding shoulders, and then goes on to the other facilities that you recommend removal. Did you have an objection to the shoulders? Hope not.
So it's your good thing.
Well, actually, to represent the council, yes, we did vote to completely delete the project from the plan.
But you said you say if it's going to stay in, delete this. You don't mention shoulders. Silent on shoulders and delete that if it stays in.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we specifically talked about shoulders because it was the other amenities that really caught our eye. So I'm sorry, I can't be really definitive on that.
That's fine.
I think that road works well the way it is, at the traffic levels the way it is. And the document itself says that it's at a level service of A without any upgrades through 2035, which is the span of this plan. So I guess that speaks for itself.
Thank you.
And of course, my amendment to not delete shoulders.
Yeah, I saw that. Just trying to make sure I have.
Okay, we've got a motion before us. We've had a little bit of discussion on it. I guess I'd like to clarify that, I hope I've got the right copy of this. I know I saw 4 or 5 different copies, but
We're working on the public hearing draft.
I'm on page 716, and I believe it's project 119. And what I see it says in here is it says rehabilitate pavement, add shoulders and turning pockets where needed, recommend pedestrian facilities. And then it says wetlands impacts anticipated, purpose, circulation, access, and safety. And then it says new sidewalk 1.2 miles, new pathway 1.2 miles. Okay, so the actual project scope says PED facilities, but down in the text, it says length of new sidewalk 1.2 and length of pathway 1.2. So those are the things we're talking then. I'm gonna have to wait till the mayor's back, but I guess those are the things we're talking about striking, is the reference to the length of those facilities.
I think the way it would read, if we adopt this amendment, Mr. Chairman, would be rehabilitate pavement, add shoulders where needed, wetland impacts anticipated, purpose, circulation, access, and safety, facility, class, minor arterial, length of project 1.2 miles.
Okay.
And then linked projects, and then what was left.
We're it's on page 716. You've got.
We got
I
it.
think you've got the same version. So let's work through this. Mr. Mayor, this was your motion, and I guess what I'm looking at is I'm looking under the project purpose and description on the right-hand column, and we're proposing striking the words "and turning pockets" from the first sentence. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then we are talking about striking the phrase "recommend pedestrian facilities." Is that also correct? And then we are also talking about essentially striking everything, the length of new sidewalk 1.2 and length of new pathway 1.2.
Correct.
Okay, so we are proposing deleting then 4 sentences or phrases from that text.
Mr. Chair,
To clarify.
in the other projects that are in here that don't have sidewalks, if you look at project 122, it says length of new sidewalk, none, length of new pathway, none. Just for keeping the
Consistent?
format the same, if we just, instead of, if we just take out the 1.2 miles and put in none, then we'd be consistent.
That works for me. That sounds like a great modification. I'm assuming that's fine.
Fine in the context of my amendments, sir.
Yes, I think that's a great consistency call. Thanks, Greg. Okay, so we've got a motion before us now with the specific lineouts that have been now identified on page 716. Mr. Burst, discussion.
I guess having worked out at the airport, spent a lot of time in town and at the airport, this is at least for me when I was at the airport, was my primary means of access from downtown to the airport. And so I guess the only trepidation I have is any constraints that would, particularly in the area of turn pockets, design considerations that would be driven by the traffic levels, that we're not tripping ourselves up, that way. And then from the bike standpoint, I mean, I see a whole lot of bikes on the road or on the shoulder. So I think the shoulder is absolutely necessary because it seems like, even if you have a bike path, it seems like a lot of the active bikers want to be in more with the flow of traffic and want to be, up on the roadway. So I think as long as we're keeping the shoulder considerations there, it's fine. But are the turn pockets, is that design placement of turn pockets, is that more a function of the level of use and intensity?
Yeah, I mean,
I guess I'm just trying to figure out what drives that.
Okay, well, I guess you've asked a question, and I'm not sure, I mean, we probably all got our opinions on that, but we've kind of got a motion from us here. Let me say, thank you for your comments, Mr. Mayor. Do you have some comments to make to that?
no additional comments.
Okay. I guess I'd like to say that I think, kind of in response to your question, which I assume you're asking me now as a transportation
Right.
guy as opposed to an AMATS chairman guy. I think turning pockets are, I think, a very effective way of reducing safety conflicts on most arterial roadways in urban areas. It's a kind of a first step that we go to when you start seeing accidents where what happens is people try to dodge around the shoulder. If somebody stops in the lane, somebody tries to dodge on the shoulder, or somebody gets rear-ended. Those are the symptoms that turning pockets cure. I don't know personally if this area has an issue with that or not. And I guess, I think what the intent here is, and I don't know that I agree or disagree with it, but it doesn't look like this project was intended originally to go add lanes to this concept. But I think turning pockets, to me, are a good thing a good flexible option for most roads. And I would echo your sentiments that I think that deleting them might be a little short-sighted. I don't think it adds a whole lot of width to most projects because the turning pocket is usually at a fairly busy location anyway. And I don't think it would be a tremendous encroachment into the neighborhood to have a turning pocket here and there. But I will,
I'll certainly defer to the folks that live in the neighborhood and deal with the traffic constraints. But
I know there's quite an issue there about the local traffic versus the through traffic, and I understand this is a continuation of that discussion. I guess I've said enough on that there. So we have a motion in front of us. Do we have any further discussion from the committee? Any further clarifications or modifications proposed to this amendment? Okay, let's take it out to the public. And does anybody from the public care to comment on the proposed amendment we've got in front of us? Ms. Gleason.
Thank you. Just to address turn pockets, if you know that section of road, the only places where you could actually where you can turn off that section of road because of airport, chain link fencing and parkland, is the two entrances into Earthquake Park. And I think that would be way overkill. Again, the document points out this road through 2035 without any upgrades is level service A. There are no traffic problems. There are none that our council has ever heard about with regard to that kind of level of need on that road.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion? We've got a motion in front of us. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, it passes 5-0. Ms. Gleason, did you have another proposed amendment?
I did, thank you. This is with regard to Turnagain Boulevard and Turnagain Street. Currently, they are classified as local roads, but in the official streets and highways plan that has gone through the process up through assembly level, and I don't know when this will go before the Anchorage Assembly, it's recommended by that document and certainly supported by Turnagain Community Council that they be classified as neighborhood collectors. And the reason for that is they actually serve and function as neighborhood collectors currently. And I guess I need clarification from your body. From our perspective, the upgrade to those projects, which initial steps have already started with a design study report, is that funding for those projects, if they're not included in this document, under the short-term project list, I mean, ideally, I was hoping that the official streets and highways plan would have gone through the process and they'd now be classified as neighborhood collectors. Then they could be inserted into this document under short-term projects, because the upgrade of those two projects in Turnagain they've been at the top of our CIP priority list for some time now. And they're in desperate need of shoulders and drainage and pedestrian facilities, lighting, and these projects are not in this document that goes through 2035, and if they're not included, I don't know if that could hinder any kind of funding that could potentially be put forward for those projects. And that's, so I guess if the answer is yes, then we definitely would like to see those projects inserted into this document.
Let me step back for a minute. Ms. Gleason, is it your intent to take us through 10 pages of
No.
changes to the MTP,
No,
project by
I will
project?
restrict my comments now to just what is within Turnagain. So I'll just have maybe one or two more after this.
One or two more after this.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak to this particular comment?
Sure.
This is the sort of project that is most likely going to be funded by a combination of state grant dollars and local bond funds. And as such, it's not necessary for it to be in this document. Really, if you're in this document, you're in this document because you want federal dollars. And frankly, if we're ever going to get those projects upgraded, God help us if we have to do a federal process to get it. So while I greatly appreciate Lisa's comments, I would suggest this body bypass this amendment.
Yeah, we don't have a motion in front of us. Ms. Gleason, could you identify the one or two more things that you would like us to consider in total so that I can get a sense of where we're going with this, and I may have some comments on that at that point in time?
Certainly. One is a mere typo change that unfortunately has yet to be made, and I'm amazed that
Which
it's
page of your
had to go through this.
memo would we be referring to?
It is page 7-60. It's a street change that.
Which, on your memo to us, which page on your
Oh,
letter?
it's page 7 at the bottom of the
Page
page.
7 at the bottom of the page, thank you. And I'm sorry now, which, and then,
So La Honda changing to Captain Cook Estates
Yes.
is the one.
Yeah, it's
is the
merely a
change.
typo change that hasn't been made yet in this document.
And what other issue would you like us to consider?
On the, it's another just correction. It's on page 9
Of your memo?
of
Okay.
the Turnagain letter, at the middle of the page. referring to Arrow Avenue as an existing link between 36th and Lakeshore Drive. That road does not exist.
So those are the two things that you wish us to consider?
Well, and then with regard to a missing link in that same spot, we'd like that deleted. And that's all.
That's all. Okay, thank you. So let me call on Mr. Catsky and Mr. Spring. Could you give us a brief rundown of how many public meetings we've had on this project and how long we've spent developing this MTP? And have these comments been made? And if so, does the TAC or does your team have some thoughts on why these comments haven't been incorporated or why they shouldn't be?
I can give you a rundown on the public involvement with the plan. This plan development was initiated back in January 2011. We began the process with review with all the municipal boards and commissions and developed a public review draft and released that in October 1st of 2011. We held 3 general public meetings as well as other meetings with other entities and interested stakeholders, and came up with, there was something like 30 or so, more than 30 commenters with over 200 specific individual recommendations for changes, which includes the recommendations and for changes from the Turnitin Community Council. The THC responded to each individual comment, which was forwarded then to the Technical Advisory Committee and as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Technical Advisory Committee made recommendations as to what changes should be made, which were then incorporated into the public hearing draft, a copy of which you have here in front of you, dated January 2012. Specific comments of this typo, for instance, was not identified, I don't think. Originally, if there was, we neglected to make that change. The other comments, though, from the Tourniquet Arm, we either made a recommendation for a change or made a recommendation to stay with the original language in that case. From that point, we went, after the public hearing draft was released in end of 2011, we went through the formal adoption process through the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Municipal Assembly, the TAC, and now, of course, the Policy Committee. With respect to the specific comment on the grid map, the recommendation from the TAC was that this is just an illustrative conceptual map showing what would happen if all the connections were made. It doesn't intend to be a recommendation for individual link connections. It was just an illustrative type of conceptual map. It doesn't necessarily mean that it corresponds to the collector system as adopted by the municipality. And we realized that there's some controversy regarding this particular connection, but it wasn't intended to make a recommendation.
As a follow-up, Gary Katzian, as a follow-up to that, we actually did make changes on page 5-20. We added the statement, the missing grid maps are used to identify missing system links, but do not constitute recommendations to construct them. So we think we were pretty clear in addressing this type of issue, that it's a guideline. It was one of the things that you look at for adding projects to the list. It doesn't mean it's the only thing you use to add to the list, but those are things that you look at as you're looking to complete the whole system. You know, very similar to the process you've been going through with the Connect Anchorage process. It doesn't mean that all of those links are to be built.
Mr. Chairman, I'd echo some of those remarks, and I note, for example, we have roads going through Merrill Field, north, south, and east and west on page 520. I don't think we're going to do that anytime soon, or even under or over. And then just sort of the general reminder that I made to the assembly, I don't know, 3-4 times, guys, that just because something's in this book doesn't mean it's gonna happen. If it does happen, it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna happen the way it's in this book. It just means it can happen. And so, while I agree with the typographical change, I think the other two, we can probably let them go and move on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kessler, Mr. Spring. I guess what I was trying to bring forward was that we've spent a very long amount of time on this project, and I hate to go in here with too many changes at this point. I think that the team and the TAC and the assembly and even P&Z to some extent have spent a lot of time and effort on this thing. I know that there's always one last thing, one more good idea, but at some point I'd like to kind of put a bow on this thing and get it set off so that we can actually continue to receive federal funds for this community, and we're up against it. So,
With that, Mr. Chairman, I would make the one amendment, move the one amendment on 7-60, Project 503, and just have the correction that La Honda Drive should read Captain Cook Estates.
And I'll second that motion.
moved and seconded. Okay, I hope there's no discussion on that comment. Anything from the public? Yes, sir.
Sure, on that issue.
No, wait, we got an issue before us, so let me, any on the motion in front of us is to change La Honda and it's Captain Cook Estates. Okay, no comment. Anybody opposed to that? Okay, that passes unanimously. All right. So, do you have a proposed change to our documentation, sir?
Yes, I do, a very brief one.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm SJ Klein, Chair of the Fairview Community Council, and I've been speaking quite a bit with both the mayor and Assemblyman Flynn about, I guess, our disappointment in specifically projects 201 and 213 being shifted to the long-term plan. Those are basically what were formerly known as highway to highway. This plan proposes to bring 36,000 vehicles in each direction, or 36,000 additional vehicles into the Fairview neighborhood, as well as streamline the traffic from both ends into the neighborhood. But then says we don't want to deal with this until 2025 at the earliest. We're working with the governor's office to get a special appropriation to do some transportation studies independently that could identify achievable projects that aren't necessarily big cut and cover things, but maybe things that will help deal with the pressure that's coming through. And I was hoping we could get just a little bit of language perhaps in 201 and 213 that would allow for the possibility of moving smaller implementable projects forward before that time period. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Well, thank you. There isn't any specific language at this point. You've all had to listen to me speak exactly to this topic several times.
So I believe a lot of these are located because of your recommendations, as a matter of fact.
Well, the 201 was split into 3 phases based on my recommendation, and 201A was moved into the short-term list with the acquiescence of this body, so we could identify some path forward in the nearer term future. And, if I were king for the day, we'd move B, C, and D up. I'm pretty sure I don't have the votes to do that. But speaking more specifically to Mr. Klein's comments, which I think were very good, I think we would actually hinder ourselves if we were to add language to 201 or 2013 in accessing those state dollars to identify some more incremental steps. In that, again, that ties you to the federal process, which, as delightful as it is, can sometimes slow projects down. And so to the extent we're seeking those state dollars to come up with some shorter term solutions, I would prefer to keep them out, and then to the extent that we need federal dollars to help support some of the implementation phases, come back with amendments to the MTP. Again, if I were king for the day, this would look very different, but I think that would be a better course. And I don't know if Mr. Klein wants to.
If I may, just to share, if I'm amenable to that, or if I should say Fairview is amenable to that, as long as this body understands that we may be coming forward with amendments in the future.
Please do. Okay, do we have any other, Mr. Flynn, did you make reference to another possible amendment that you want us to consider today?
I was just, yeah, it was Project 209, Mr. Chairman.
Project 209?
Yeah, it's on page 7-21. Here it is, Chris. It's the restriping. It's in the long-term plan and got some neighborhood concerns. Since it's not imminent anyway, I'd like to move that Project 209 into the illustrative list.
Restripe project. Unless we get a second, we're not going anywhere with this.
I understand the rules, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to announce this.
Someone wanted to just.
Okay, I guess we're not going to consider that because I don't hear a second on it. Thank you for your comment.
Trying to save $500,000, you can't get in.
Okay. Any, it's a restriping job.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask now, I think we're near the end of what we understood. Does anybody from the public have any other issues they'd like to bring forward? I believe we're getting close to trying to adopt this document, and it's based on the modifications made here today. So does anybody have any further specific modifications they'd like to propose? Does anybody from this body have any more specific modifications they'd like to propose? I believe if we go back several hundred words ago, and maybe even 100 minutes ago, did we originally have a motion to adopt this plan before us?
That's how it started, yeah.
I believe that's how it started, but it seems like it was a while ago.
If not, I move the.
There was a motion. Moved by Sullivan, let's see. Proposed adoption of the plan, moved by Sullivan, Birch seconded.
Thank you. I believe we're at that point. So would anybody from the committee, Mr. Birch, would you like to have any comments before we take on this final action? Further comments?
Let's finish it and get ready to start the next one.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, I'm sure you would like to say a few things.
I wish that weren't so true.
Unfortunately, that's exactly the way it is.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you and our consultant team and our staff teams for yeoman's work. It's been a long road. We haven't always agreed, but I think we have a relatively solid plan in front of us. And I'd like to, briefly note that the work this committee has done over the past 10 or 15 years has really moved Anchorage forward in a lot of ways. If you look at the level of service analysis in here, and we're better off today than we were 10 years ago. That's pretty impressive, given the way a lot of other communities are going. And I think as we move forward with this, presumably we're judicious in how we implement it, we'll continue to make those improvements, and I look forward to working with you to achieve them.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
I certainly echo those comments. I want to thank staff and the consultants and certainly the public for their input. It really is a cooperative process and it never works out to anybody's perfect satisfaction, but really I think we do have a good solid plan going forward. The whole concept of Connect Anchorage makes a lot of sense. It's not easy to do. As we develop more as a city, it becomes even harder to do. My predecessor once said that there's no easy road projects anymore in Anchorage, and he was absolutely right. It's very challenging to make the connections you need to do, but overall, I think we are making good progress and improving the quality of transportation in our city of all modes of transportation. We passed a bike plan a couple of years ago that it changes how we build roads, and so we're recognizing every community that has transportation needs, whether it's pedestrians, bicyclists, or motorized vehicles, and so appreciate all the hard work, and we're making good progress.
Ms. Edwards, any comments?
I just want to thank everybody too for the hard work and just remind everyone that, as we mentioned, we're going to we update these on a fairly regular basis. So there's, while not everything may have gotten addressed today, there will be other opportunities to do so. So I think it's been a lot of great hard work putting this together. It's come a long way.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump on that train of thought also and say that it's been longer than we thought it was going to be, but we still made our deadline. That's great. So John and Gary, especially, I think, Ann, you guys have done a great job in shepherding this thing through, and I think we can all be proud of the result. As other people have mentioned, it's not a case of perfection, but I think it's a case of good workable plan that'll take us forward, gives a good foundation to build good things for this community. And I think as we change and grow as a community, this is a reflection of how we change and grow, and I think it's a good document to do that. So I look forward to this committee adopting it and getting it forward and getting it finally approved and implemented. So with that, I will ask, does anybody from the public have any final comments before we vote on this document? Mr. Katzian.
Yeah, Gary Katzian, as a member of the project team, I'd like to thank the policy committee, the TAC Plus, that has helped guide us throughout this process. There's a lot of cooperation between the groups, the general public in showing up and becoming engaged in the process. I think that's a reflection of the plan itself. So I just wanted to thank everybody for making our job move fairly smoothly during this last 15 months. So, and all the cooperation between the agency staff that was involved as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sprague.
I hate to drag this on, but I just want to thank the public for their comments. I've been involved in a number of these things, and I think the comments we received were exceptionally good this time around. Very well thought out, and I have to compliment the project team too, and the TAC, and the fact that they incorporated quite a few of the comments into the plan, and I think it really helped add value to it.
Great, thank you, John. All right, with that, I will reiterate that this is a motion before us to adopt the 2035 MTP as modified by our lengthy discussion here this morning. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously, thank you. I feel years younger, hours later. Now we move on to, I believe our next business item is we have an OB report. Mr. Rudolph will be taking us through this, is that correct? That's correct. Thank you. Mark, you have the floor.
Bart Rudolph with DOT. This is the colorful document you have before you. Certainly not anything new to this committee, but I will go over what's in it real quickly. This is a list of all the projects that are in the TIP. If you move your way to the right, the first column that's a purplish color, that's in our draft TIP amendment that's currently undergoing public review process, set to go before the Assembly very shortly, and then will be approved by this committee. So these numbers are what's in the TIP amendment right now. The yellow column is what's been obligated so far. The blue column is what we anticipate obligating. So the blue and the yellowish column should kind of equal what is in the purplish column. And if it doesn't, we ask for approval from this committee along the way, because those numbers do change. So currently, we have already sought approval for Huffman Road. That's the major difference. There are no other major differences on page 1. Everything seems to be aligning with what's in the plan TIP amendment. If you go to page 2, under the transportation enhancements category, halfway down the page, project number G2, the Glen Highway Trail Rehab, we upped the amount in the TIP amendment to $5.1 million. That has gone through an engineer's estimate and certified through DOT, which means it goes through different sections, and everyone makes sure that that is the right price. And we asked the TAC for approval for $6,006,000 to bump that up to. That certification process has been finalized now, and the engineer's estimate is now $6.34 million. So we're going to ask this committee to approve that change from changing what's in the TIP amendment of $5.1 million to $6.34 million so we can advertise this project and get it moving. The other change, there's some de-obligations there which happen over time, and those monies are used to cover construction overruns and things like what I just mentioned, the change in estimates. So no other big projects to mention on page 2. Page 3 is the same. This is mainly our CMAQ category. Everything is matching up exactly what's in the TIP amendment. No perceived changes there. If you go to page 4, this is where we total everything up. And if you look at the total AMATS allocation and the TIP amendment is about $36.3 million. If you add up the blue and the yellow columns, we're anticipating to obligate about $33.9 million right now. So we have a little wiggle room of $2.3 million in the red box there. So at this point in time, we're required to be within 10% of our AMATS allocation. We're 6.5%. Looking in good shape right now, still have some wiggle room. Nothing else notable to add. We do add things on the general funded projects. All those projects have been obligated and are moving forward. So with this report, I just ask you to approve that Glen Highway Trail Rehab obligation change from $5.1 million to $6,340,000. And then if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you.
We need a motion, Mr.
Yes, we
Chair,
do.
to approve that. So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Any discussion on the content in general or the specific project that is requiring our approval? Mr. Birch?
Just had a question in general on when you finish up a project and you have, you de-obligate, are you seeing, from just in general, are you seeing very competitive construction awards out there? I mean, so, as we look forward, trying to figure out I know from a city standpoint, you see an engineer's estimate and then there's, 10 bids underneath it.
I think from my perspective, I'm not quite as close to the money as I used to be in terms of specific projects, but what I see is a competitive construction bidding environment, and we quite often have change orders or claims during the project that bring it back up remarkably close to the original engineer's estimate before it settles out.
All right.
Yeah.
Good work. This is great.
So do we have any further discussion, Mr. Flynn, Mr. Sullivan, any further comments on this action item? So words, anybody from the public care to comment on this adoption? Anyone opposed to approval of this as presented? Passes unanimously. That's our final action item today, since you're departing.
Well, only with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, as I do depart, I just wanted to inform the body, I did pass out a resolution which Mr. Lyons has copies of that I would be bringing forward as an action item next meeting regarding the Port of Anchorage Intermodal Expansion Project and the funding that came through Safety Lou that has not been remitted to the port, and so I want to get that on the table for discussion for the next meeting.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your attention.
And that's not that I don't want to hear your report, but I'll keep an eye on you anyway. So. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes our business items for today. Informational reports, I've got annual summary of air quality.
It is.
We have 10 minutes left. Should we go ahead with this? There's, I think, 3 reports.
Well, you've got about 3 minutes each.
Real fast. I have handed out, each of you have the full version of this. I'll give you the quick Cliff Notes version of this report. This is Air Quality Month under the Public Involvement Plan. AMATS has got a regular calendar of getting these updates, and this is the air quality update for April. So I'm just going to give you a quick status report on the pollutants that are of concern in Anchorage. Talk about carbon monoxide, particulate matter, ozone, airborne lead, and air toxics. Those are actually, that's not really a criteria pollutant. There are no standards for benzene or air toxics, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to talk about sulfur dioxide or nitrogen dioxide because they're really not issues in Anchorage. Carbon monoxide, you've heard about that as long as you've lived here, I'm sure. It's odorless gas that primarily comes from motor vehicles, 79% estimated in Anchorage. Our highest concentrations occur in the middle of winter when we have strong temperature inversions, and somewhat unique to Anchorage, our highest concentrations occur in residential areas because of warm-up idling, and that's why we do the Plug at 20 program, encouraging people to plug in their block heaters, which reduces CO emissions by about 60% from motor vehicles. Here's the trend in Anchorage. I like to say I started at the very beginning there, and it's been a steady downward trend since I started working for the air quality program in the early 1980s. But you can see the dramatic reduction in carbon monoxide in Anchorage over the years. I can remember it in the early 80s, Anchorage violating the carbon monoxide standards 50 times per year. We haven't had a violation since 1996, and our concentrations have dropped from above 25 parts per million down to 4 or 5 parts per million now. Despite that, Anchorage still has some of the highest CO concentrations in the country. You see Anchorage and Fairbanks are at the top of this list. These are just kind of selected cities, I think biased towards the high ones. You can see that the concentrations in Anchorage are almost 10 times higher than they are in Seattle, and that's a function primarily of our climate. I'm going to move on, switch gears here a little bit and talk about particulate matter. And there's two versions of that. One we call PM10 and one PM25. PM10 are the larger ones. They're 10 microns in size. You can see the relative size compared to a width of a human hair there on this side. They're both very small particles. We know that PM10 is linked with asthma and other respiratory problems. There's been some local studies done in Anchorage that show that doctors' visits for asthma and bronchitis go up when we have high PM10 levels, and we're just past the time of year when we have high PM10 levels. There have been national studies that show that death rates in hospitals increase when these finer PM2.5 particles are high. I mentioned the doctor's visits already. So PM10, the source of PM10 is primarily geological, road dust, volcanic ash, glacial silt, that sort of thing. We have occasional violations of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, that's at NAAQS there. Along major roads, we have a monitor very close to Tudor Road, and we have seen violations there in past years. The municipality is applying magnesium chloride as a dust suppressant along major roads in Anchorage and Eagle River, and we think that's helped. They finished the mag chloride program this spring, but beginning late March through about the end of April, they have been applying, street maintenance that is, have been applying this mag chloride to major roadways, both mostly actually state-owned roads, the very high volume roads, Tudor, Muldoon, et cetera. Eagle River is a non-attainment area right now. In theory, we had a problem with gravel roads in the kind of the urban portion of Eagle River. Those roads have either been surfaced with recycled asphalt or paved, and the problem's gone away. We haven't had a violation since the late 1980s. And lately we've been dealing with issues that one of the things that EPA has a provision that allows exceptional events or natural events to be excluded from consideration in violations of the air quality standard. We've had a number of events in the last few years where we've seen windblown dust from primarily the Matanuska River blowing into Anchorage and Eagle River and causing us to exceed the standard. And there's a long process that EPA requires of documenting and proving, if you will, that these things are natural, not anthropogenic emissions. And here's a photograph. I don't know how well you can see it, but you can see the silt. This is a satellite image. You can see the silt pouring out of the Sitna River, and these are carried. This is silt that's carried out of those glacial river valleys by strong north winds. I think on this day, with the wind speeds, we're above 40 miles per hour in gusts. So that's been an issue we've been kind of struggling with. PM 2.5. Good news is that we have some of the lowest PM 2.5 concentrations in the country. I guess the bad news is that Fairbanks doesn't. Fairbanks has had a real issue with that, primarily related, I think, to wood burning. Is that? I know there's been some question about that. We're tracking this issue. I mean, there's a possibility natural gas prices could go up and drive people towards more wood heating, and so we're doing annual surveys to see whether there's any tendency for people to heat with wood more often. So far, we haven't seen that. We've done some carbon-14 analysis of some of the samples particulate samples we've collected in some of the residential areas. It's pretty clear that almost all our PM 2.5 comes from wood smoke. That's new carbon versus fossil carbon. You use carbon-14 analysis in the same way that you use carbon dating, and you can distinguish the new carbon, meaning wood, from the old carbon, meaning gasoline or diesel. And then, to the Assembly's credit, they passed a wood boiler ordinance in Anchorage that limits the installation of these wood boilers, which are shown in this picture, to EPA-certified Phase 2 standards, which we think if there is a move towards that sort of heating, that will help us a lot. I think that's not the case in Fairbanks. They don't have a Phase 2 requirement, do they?
They do now.
Oh, now they do, okay. We haven't seen any real trend upward or downward either in PM 2.5. I guess that's good for PM 2.5 because we're so low. PM10, we'd like to see a thing that curve drop a little bit. We're working hard, the mag chloride program, we'd like to see that have some impact, but right now it's pretty steady as she goes. We're not seeing a big impact. We'd like to reduce those PM10 levels. Ozone is not really an issue here. We've been monitoring for ozone because EPA mandates it for large metropolitan areas like, well, we just meet the requirement in terms of population. Ozone can be good. It's essential in the upper atmosphere and in the stratosphere, but when it's produced at the ground, it causes respiratory irritation, coughing, and pain. And other problems. We've been monitoring, in the state has been monitoring for also in Wasilla, but we're seeing that our ozone levels are very, very low. We think that virtually all of it is natural ozone. There's some ozone that's formed in the troposphere just through natural processes. In fact, we've compared our concentrations to Denali National Park and actually found that concentrations in Anchorage and Eagle River are lower than they are at Denali National Park. So,
More buses there.
yeah. Airborne lead, we started a project just last fall. We're monitoring airborne lead concentrations at Merrill Field. This is a satellite photograph. The little A shows where our monitor is, right smack dab in the, I think EPA, the intent was to identify the highest probable location for airborne lead. That's right at the head of runway 25. We've been monitoring there for about 6 months. So far, the lead concentrations there seem to be about a third of the air quality standard, so that's good news. There's an issue. The reason we're monitoring there is because aviation fuel for piston aircraft still contains considerable amount of lead. They've eliminated lead from gasoline, but that's not the case with aviation fuel. So they're doing, EPA is doing this, we're monitoring for them. They're doing this in 14 other airports around the country. And lastly, I'll talk about benzene. And again, there's not an air quality standard for benzene, but that's been a concern here in Anchorage. We've monitored past years, but we most recently completed phase 1 of what we hope is a 2-phase study. We did 1 year of monitoring in a residential area in East Anchorage when the benzene content of our gasoline was about 5%, and we found that even in a residential area, we have some of the highest benzene levels in the country. We're in the top 2% of the country in terms of benzene concentrations. And then we're hoping to do a phase 2 where we do basically repeat phase 1, monitor again for a year. Tesoro has made a big investment, we understand $150 million investment in taking the benzene or much of the benzene out of the gasoline. They have to meet a new EPA mandated limit of 1.3% or less than 1.3%. My understanding, they've done this and they've already accomplished this. And so we're waiting for funding, which we are told forthcoming to do phase 2, and we're hoping that we'll see a big reduction in the ambient benzene concentrations as a consequence of this removal of the benzene in gasoline. Just to give you an idea, here's 2 satellite photos of our East Anchorage site there on the top, with A is right where the monitor is. This is in a typical East Anchorage residential area. And then the bottom photograph shows Galena Park, Texas. It's hard to see, but the bottom is Ship Canal, heavily industrialized area with lots of refinery operations and petroleum storage. The concentrations at our garden site were comparable to those along Ship Canal during that 1 year monitoring. So that just shows you how significant those cold starts, the gasoline, the benzene content of gasoline is in affecting our levels of benzene in our neighborhoods. And hopefully it's much lower now, but we'll see in phase 2. And so I'll quickly summarize. COs dropped dramatically. PM10 is a problem. Personally, I think that's sort of the most important issue in Anchorage right now, maybe aside from the benzene problem, where magnesium chloride is being used as a way to address it. We're hoping that it's making some impact. It's not clear that it is, at least on an area-wide basis. PM 2.5, we're good right now. No real concerns. As I said, ozone very low. And then benzene, we hope we're in an environment now where the benzene levels are a lot lower than they were a couple of years ago. With that, well, that took longer than I thought, sorry.
You can pretty much use up all the lenses, Tom.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Steve. Do you have a way of determining, with this PM10, you talked about specific natural disasters, or whatever you call it, natural events that allow you an exception from those rules. Do you have any way of determining what the ambient background PM10 is versus the, quote, man-made PM10 is in a community like this?
very difficult to distinguish, like chemically, for example, almost impossible. Stuff that's in the Matsu that blows down here, and the stuff that we generate ourselves, say along roads, almost indistinguishable. So that's very difficult. But basically, when we make our arguments to EPA that this is natural caused, we look at meteorological data. We have actually the last climatologists working right now developing mesoscale models that show, under these conditions, where would the dust go from the Matanuska River Valley or from the Mississippi River Valley. So it's all sort of circumstantial evidence that in support of the fact that we have these natural events, and they're very rare. I mean, it's pretty obvious if you look at our data. You see this distribution of data, and then a couple of way outlier points. I mean, just 4 times higher than anything else, and it seems to me like it's a lot of wasted effort, to be honest. I mean, to have all this documentation, but they have rejected similar waiver requests from California, for example. So it's incumbent upon us to develop a good argument for them.
Yeah, I think to me, it's one of those things like turbidity in water, with some of our receiving waters are clearly very, have a very high content, and some of the EPA regulations don't recognize that. I think it's kind of a silly lack of common sense on their part, I guess I'd put it. I'm not an air quality scientist, but just for a person that's walked around this community, especially on the Bluff area when it's a windy day, I mean, there's a lot of stuff blowing that's not coming off the highway,
Yeah. Well, I happen to work at the health department with a view of the inlet, and there have been days when the winds are blowing 45 knots, and you look outside and go, here it comes. I mean, you can see it coming in from the valley, and so it does. And then the satellite photographs are very, I think
even on an average day, though, 5 or 10 mile an hour wind, I think you're getting probably some uptick there based on just.
Generally very low, but.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any comments or questions?
Anyway. Would you build the bridge, or have to put a particulate screen out?
That's our plan.
Thank you. Anybody from the public have any comments or questions for Mr. Morris? Okay, thanks. Thank you. I think I'm going to have to request that Lance, I apologize, and Steve, I apologize, but I don't think I've got the mental capacity to go through another couple presentations here today. Can we defer you guys for a month for your remaining 2 items on the informational agenda? Is that going to work for you guys? Let me put it this way. Thank you for accepting that, and we'll see you next month.
Mr. Chair, the meeting is actually
This month.
May 24th, because this was our April meeting, but we will defer them to the next meeting.
To the next meeting, thank you. Does any of the committee have any further closing comments?
I'll move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any objection to that motion? We're adjourned.